So I'm fortunate to be here with Dr. Lee Shilts here today, who's really big in the solution focus development and purporting that throughout the years, and of course now it's taken on this big life of its own. So I wanted to spend a few minutes just talking with him about that and about counseling in general, and some guidance and things like that he would provide for those who are interested in the model and a couple other things.
The exposure that I got with the Milwaukee group, as they've been referred to, was the best education I ever got.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with them, and then I went back and got my doctorate degree at a very good accredited program, but it didn't even come close to my experience with DeShazer and Berg. And the reason I say that is I was fortunate enough to watch them develop this model of therapy, and they really didn't know where they were going to go with it. Mm-hmm. So talk about explorers. And then many years later, Sue would say, we had no idea that it would become what it became years later. So they were just trying initially to find a better way to do therapy, and they didn't know what that would look like. And then through trial and error, they kind of stumbled into what became known as the solution-focused approach.
And fortunately, you being able to be a part of that and have their direct influence, what was that like? Watching, learning, practicing, and then going on your own and carrying that, and you turn that into a training model for schools, into your own types of trainings and books.
Well,
and articles.
it like I said, it was the most epiphanal type of experience, if that's the correct word. I mean, it took my psychotherapy world and turned it upside down, because I was trained initially to do more assessment, and then I early years worked with kind of client-centered and toyed around with the CBT model, and was getting frustrated with those. But then to see that model and what possibly it meant as a therapist working with clients was incredibly exciting. And so it changed me as a therapist, as the way I thought about therapy. And it was, when you ask how it just then was a natural launching pad for me.
Why do you think it resonated with you so strongly, that it hung with you? I mean, you even refer to it, you don't even refer to it as solution focused that much, you refer to it as the model. That's what I always find really intriguing.
Yeah.
You've always called it the model,
Right?
As if there's none other. It's really resonated so deeply with you.
Well, yeah.
What is it about the model?
Well, there's several
so
things,
deeply?
and maybe I've come to the conclusion that maybe one of the things that intrigues me most is I can't really put my finger on what intrigues me the most. So that in itself is intriguing, that I can't figure it out what it is. But if you
Keeps you coming back.
yeah, if you ask me today, I can tell you this. But if you ask me a year from now, you might have a different response. But I think if I had to crystallize it down, and we were talking about this the other day, I didn't realize it at the time when I was working the model, but the hopefulness it gives people.
Okay.
And the idea that people are capable of getting themselves to a better place. At the time was such a radical idea. Now people talk about the models so much that it's considered commonplace, but at the time, this whole idea that people could get to a better place with their depression or their substance abuse problems was really quite far out there. People just didn't talk that way. They didn't think that way. So that was what really freed me up, and the possibilities. And then then it was just a matter of working the model and the idea of what I do in schools with it just seemed to be uh, something that just followed. And then, of course, I was able to maintain, even after I left the Milwaukee area, I was able to maintain a personal, professional relationship with Stephen Insoo. So I was very fortunate that way too.
So it seems to always be new and intriguing, or something that keeps it alive for you. That doesn't. It's not just like you show up and I'm going to teach this again, or here's some clients and I'm going to do solution focused again. And for you, you've held on to it for so long because there's something there that, like, for you, it's new, it's intriguing. How would you describe that?
Let me give you an example. You talk to a therapist and they say, I work with addictions. And then you talk to another therapist and he or she will say, I work with a lot of depressed people. And then you go to the next therapist and they say, I work with marital discord or marital difficulties. And they seem to categorize, and then they seem to talk that, you work with one depressed person and then it's the same as working with a second and a third. Mm-hmm. And it becomes kind of stale and repetitive. Whereas with this approach, because you don't spend a lot of time ruminating about what brings the people to therapy, everything is so different no matter what. Even if it's like two people who come and they both say they're depressed initially, it's two vastly different conversations. And that keeps you fresh, and that might help with the self-care, because I think it's so interesting. Insoo made a comment once that has stayed with me all these years. She said, have you ever noticed many times the clients presenting concerns has nothing to do with their goals? At the time I thought, gee, that doesn't make sense. If I miss it, we should be that. And I have been amazed in my work and in training and teaching the model. This seems to be one of the things that, especially people who are trying to learn the model, is that just because somebody comes in with a bulimia, maybe they'll know their week is better because they'll smile more. And then, of course, the only thing I can remotely connect that to would be Milton Erickson's idea of systemic change.
Right.
So, and Steve, of course, was highly influenced by Erickson's stuff. So, those kind of things have energized me for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
It's hard to find something that energizes you that long. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a part of the,
Yeah.
the interest and intrigue in terms of how you've taken to that,
Right.
but, having been a part of that core group early
Right.
on. So having seen the kind of the arc over the decades and over your career, where do you see, solution-focused heading? I mean, it used to be this revolutionary idea. Now it's so prominent in not just systemic thinking, but in mental health. It's in the textbooks.
Yeah.
It's not just in family therapy anymore.
Yeah.
And it's not just this idea that you all were playing with in Milwaukee, back in the day. So talk about the arc and where it is now and where you see it, 10 years from now, 20 years from now.
Well, Insoo always had the vision that she wanted the solution focused in everything. So that was her goal, and I certainly, I think of any model that has gone beyond the traditional psychotherapy world. I think solution focus. It's I've talked to people around the world that are involved with the model in schools, obviously, and working with sports consultation and business and coaching and medicine and things like that. So I see the model just growing and evolving and being tried in different areas. I also see people working hard to get more evidence-based research. I think the next goal with psychotherapy in general, but this would include the model, is how do we as a profession try to convince funding agencies to give more serious consideration to
Right.
the mental health field in general, and that's going to be a challenge. And particularly, there was a time when it looked like funding was going to be something that we could count on, and now it's become less and less. So that's certainly a challenge. I think the interest, the scholarly interest is there. It's now being able to somehow get that and the politics together to move it
Right.
forward, because I'm pretty convinced, but it's going to come through very biased. I think the model has proven that it can make a vast difference in a lot of different contexts
Yeah.
for a lot of people. The wall work that we do in classrooms can help transform the whole classroom.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
a pretty wild
Yeah.
kind of a notion,
Right. Right.
So,
Not only has it, persisted through the test of time, but also the test
Yeah.
of different venues.
Yeah.
And like you said,
Yeah.
hopefully in the future,
yeah,
even
and
more,
the research base is getting, the research evidence is getting thicker and better too. So,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. Fantastic.
so-
So then in terms of, students that really, that you find really are resonating with this strongly, and they're just like, oh, Dr. Shilts, come on, I want to dig into this. What do I do? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? What's your advice? What do you recommend?
Well, that's a tough question, because I guess if you're really interested in the model, a good starting place, I mean, you can get on web pages and you can look at the materials, but eventually you got to take the literature and you got to put it into practice. So I would suggest to students that are really interested in it, they have to seek out someone who has got a fairly good knowledge base and experience with the model.
Right.
And one of the things you can do is there's now an association for solution-focused therapy, and you can contact that association, and they can help you find people in the area where you're living, possibly, or give you some names of people to train with. But I mean, I can't stress enough the importance of getting someone who not just says I do solution-focused therapy, but really can convince you that they embrace it in their work and really understand it, and
Right.
then go with that to
Okay.
develop your skill sets.
So then pulling back from solution focused and even pulling back from counseling in particular, and looking at the person of the therapist, you, through being in this field through your career, and talk about self-care and the place of that in your life, the importance of the role that's played, and kind of how you see that and convey that to your students as well.
It's a learning process. I mean, you have to learn how to survive, and that's kind of a learning process. If you're dealt with some fortunate genes, so to speak, I've always, for example, have been able to separate work from my personal life pretty easily, so that worked well for me. But for those that can't, I think you need to find out. We tell our clients, take some time off and do that. We all know it's essential for ourselves. So it's finding a process. I will say this, just to pitch the model again. It's one of the better models that helps you do some self-care for yourself, in that you kind of, once you embrace it, you have to kind of, you gut check what's working for you
Yeah.
in your therapeutic world. So and then the other thing, when you're able to get to that point where you're very comfortable, it becomes second nature. It becomes part of your fabric to give the therapy over to the client or family. That will certainly help you take
Right.
better care of yourself too.
Right, absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. Remember what that was regarding your take on pathology, especially as it relates to, solution focused, and how they would define
Can I say it on
pathology.
camera? It's bullshit.
And that's what I wanted to hear. All right. Thank you, Dr. Lee Shilts, and thanks for your time, and I hope you all enjoyed this.
All I know is I wake up here in my clothes tomorrow. Oh, girl, I wish I knew you well. Oh, girl, I wish I knew you well. But I'm just saying hi to your answering bell. Did I run? But I was walking.